special meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board to order. Seated tonight are our regular members, myself, David Rathman, Gardner Young, Ben Filbert, Lynn Conway, and the alternate seated tonight will be Ryan Deasy. If Fred Dykeman shows up, Ryan will give up the seat to him. Do I hear a motion on the minutes for the September 1st meeting?
This is Ben. I make a motion to approve the minutes as entered.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No, they look good.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Keith,
All right, if everyone can please mute their microphones, whether you're on a computer or a telephone, because we get feedback like that.
Charlie, are you on? There, okay. Go ahead, Keith. Now it's stopped.
Well, for old business, it's just tabling this application for Mason's Island Company. We're waiting for a special use permit application to accompany that. As far as the public hearings, for item 7A, this is the continuation of the hearing for the subdivision on South Anguilla Road. The applicant requested another continuation to the next meeting on October 6th. So if we could just have a motion to continue to the next meeting.
Do I hear a motion?
This is Ben. So moved.
Do I hear a second?
This is Gardner, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No. Keith, I think we'll go to wind development now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So people don't sit through a discussion about retaining walls.
Yeah. When we do this, would you first tell everyone how affordable housing works before you even start the hearings, please?
Oh, sure. And I'm sure this is something Attorney Sweeney was planning on mentioning too, but the applicants here, they're applying for a special use permit under section 830G of Connecticut General Statutes. And that section of state law basically says that if someone is applying for a development with a certain percentage of housing, whether rental or owner, that's dedicated as affordable to people making under a certain income, and that's kept that way for a minimum of 40 years, basically the normal zoning rules don't apply. The commission really can only deny an application like this if there are clear health and safety problems with it that outweigh the need for affordable housing and that can't be remedied reasonably with changes to the application. So unless there's a clear health and safety reason, towns really can't deny something like this. And it's because the state realizes that affordable housing is such an important need in the state, also an important need in this region. Things like aesthetic concerns or just basic traffic congestion don't make the cut for something like that either.
Excuse me, Keith. Excuse me, Keith. This is Lynn. I cannot hear anything due to the background noise. Could everyone please mute their mics? Thank you. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks. Right, so that's the basic background of how they're applying. It's not your average special use permit. The commission has less discretion, basically.
Yeah,
And
down here that one burned out.
so, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So it's not the same level of discretion and basically authority that the commission is used to having with these applications. So that's the basics of what's different between this application and most of the special use permits that come before you.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
Good evening. Fred, a reminder, will you mute your microphone, please? Mr. Fred Dyckman. Pursuant to the general statutes of the state of Connecticut, revision of 1958, and all amendments thereto, and pursuant to the zoning regulations for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, the Planning and Zoning Commission hereby gives notice that it will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, September 15th, 2020 at 7 p.m. by virtual meeting on the following application. PZ 2017 SUP, Wind Development Company LP, special use permit application for the development of an 82-unit residential apartment building with 70% of the units leased as affordable housing pursuant to CGS 8-30G. Proposal includes parking, stormwater management, utilities, and associated landscaping. Properties located at 27 West Broad Street and 15 Cogswell Street, Pawcatuck. Assessors Map 1, Block 4, Lots 18 and 19.
Seated for this public hearing is, I noticed that Fred Dyckman has come, so the 5 regular members will be seated. The alternate members have the right to question. First, the way the public hearing works, the first we'll hear from the applicant, and then all those in favor of the application. And then we'll hear from anyone opposed to the application. And then if I have anyone who has general comments on the application. The applicant will have a right to rebuttal. At the end, we'll go back to the town planner for the planning department's opinion or questions. So we'll start right now, and Bill Sweeney is the applicant. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I apologize. My computer camera died literally minutes before this hearing, so I'm doing this on a phone. So I apologize if the clarity isn't what it should be. But good evening. My name is Bill Sweeney. I'm a partner and I'm a land use attorney at the law firm of Tobin Carberry in New London. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this evening. I represent Wind Development Company LP, which is the development arm of Wind Companies, which is a private, family-owned regional housing developer that's based in Boston. I appear before you tonight in connection with my client's application for a special permit for an 82-unit affordable housing project to be constructed at 27 West Broad Street and 15 Cogswell Street in Pawcatuck within your PV5 district. This will be an inclusive mixed income residential project, which is somewhat different than many of the affordable housing projects of the past, which you may be familiar with. It's critical to note, and I think the chairman, I appreciated his asking Keith for some context. It's critical, though, to note that this application is submitted specifically under Section 8-30G of the general statutes, which is known as Connecticut's Affordable Housing Appeals Act. And as a result, tonight, your review of our application and the project is going to be quite different than what you would normally do for another special permit. And it's going to be subject to the strict provisions of that statutory process. I'm going to go through those with you, although Keith has done a very good job, as usual, in sort of outlining them for you tonight. There are some people on the call with me you're going to hear from tonight. I just want to introduce them quickly. Joining me is Matt Rabena. Matt is the project manager with Wind Development. I also have Adam Stein, who's the Senior Vice President of Wind Development. Paul Vitaliano is our project engineer with VHB Engineers. I also have Joe Balskis. He's a professional traffic engineer, also with VHB. And I also have Jay Szymanski, who's the project architect with the architectural team. This evening, we're going to start a little bit differently than in some of my other presentations. I'm going to have my client actually introduce themselves and share some information regarding Wind Development's exciting work on inclusive mixed income projects. And I'm doing that so you can better understand the nature of wind development, but also the residential use we're proposing. After that, I'm going to provide some brief background and an introduction on our project in the Pawtucket neighborhood. Mr. Vitaliano, our engineer, is going to walk you through our site plan. He's going to focus on the project layout, stormwater and utility plans, traffic circulation and parking areas. He's going to talk about landscaping. And he's going to talk about on-site amenities and common areas, which include a dedicated passive recreation space along the Pawcatuck River and an easement to the town of Stonington that will allow for the potential of a future public river walk or trail. Mr. Balkis, who has completed the traffic impact study for the project, he's going to discuss anticipated traffic generation from the site. He's also going to share some proposed off-site traffic improvements we're going to be making on West Broad Street that are going to be subject to DOT approval. And finally, Mr. Szymanski will discuss the architectural design concept for the project, some precedents we used, and review with you floor plans, elevations, and materials and colors. I'll close the presentation tonight with some concluding remarks, but I'll also provide you some guidance on how to evaluate our application in terms of zoning compliance and your special permit criteria in light of the fact this is an 8-30G application and there is a statutory process that you have to follow. For the record, I would note that we've provided public notice of this public hearing to all abutting property owners as required by your regulations. We've also received the necessary approval from the Stonington Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Commission, and we've received favorable recommendations from the Stonington Economic Development Commission and the Police Commission for the project. And as Keith indicated, while landscape and architectural design is squarely outside of the jurisdiction of the commission to consider in affordable housing projects, we did meet with the Architectural Design Review Board last evening as a courtesy. We received some comments and some suggestions which we are considering. Timing, though, is critical, and we hope to garner your support for the project tonight. Our client is currently working with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Connecticut Department of Housing on the construction financing of this project and is prepared to submit a competitive application for federal low-income housing tax credits upon the approval of this project by this commission. This application to CHFA is due next month, and consequently, we would certainly appreciate your action on this application this evening so that we can move forward with the next critical step of what we believe is an important affordable housing effort in this community. With that, I'm going to ask Matt Rabena and Adam Stein to speak a little bit about their company and some of the projects that they work on, the nature of their work for.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Rabina from Wind Development. Can everyone hear me okay?
No.
No, you can't hear me?
Not really, not too clearly.
Okay.
I can hear you clearly. I'm not sure if it's different for different people.
Any better?
Yeah, that's a little better.
All right, I'll try to speak loudly so you can hear me. So I'm joined tonight from Wind by Adam Stein, who's a senior vice president of Wind Development, which is our real estate development arm, and Lori Ritchie, who is a senior vice president of Wind Residential, which is our property management arm, who will oversee the property day to day once we've constructed and leased it up. I'll give you a brief overview of who Wind Companies is and what we do, as Bill alluded to. So Wind Companies is a 50-year-old family-owned company, And we're a group of three interrelated organizations: Wind Development, which owns and develops real estate, mostly affordable and mixed income housing throughout the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. Wind Residential, which is a property management group that manages over 100,000 units of multifamily housing across the country, of all stripes, including workforce and affordable housing, but also market rate housing, military housing. And then Wind Military, which is a arm of Wind Residential that is the largest manager of privatized military housing in the country for the Department of Defense. In Connecticut, we're very active and have been for a very long time, including 14 different properties in 8 different towns throughout the state. We have over 2,300 units that we own and operate in some commercial space as well. And across the country, we develop multifamily housing of all types, with the predominant type being affordable, mixed income, and workforce development. Wind Development, as I've noted, is primarily focused in the multifamily space, but we also do branch into commercial and mixed-use development and have done hotels, retail, medical offices, garages. And we, as Bill alluded to, primarily utilize state forms of financing to construct our projects. In this case, we're working with the Connecticut Housing and Finance Authority and the Connecticut Department of Housing to finance the project that we're proposing on the former Campbell Grain site. And that's a competitive funding application process that requires a high level of readiness to proceed, which includes having these zoning approvals in hand in order to make a successful application. Over the past several years, we've developed over 50 properties, totaling over 10,000 units. And we're a leading national advocate for the development of workforce and mixed income housing. We're actually some of the first developers to use workforce housing programs in states like Massachusetts and New York, and really push in Connecticut to develop housing that has market rate and workforce housing components to broaden the group of people that our communities serve. We have strong relationships with the public financing arms, including CHFA and DOH, who will be financing this project. We're strong in innovative financing for complex projects, of which this is a very good example. And we have several other projects that include age-restricted housing, other mixed-income housing projects, and we really leverage having an in-house management arm to ensure efficient property operations and making sure that the properties stay looking fresh over time and operate appropriately within the community and really serve as a community asset. As I mentioned, Wind Residential is our management arm, and Lori Ritchie from our management arm is here and can answer any questions about how the property will operate. But Wind Residential is a very experienced operator of affordable workforce and mixed income housing. And they're involved with our process on the development side from the very beginning, including influencing the design, working with us to get all the local approvals, and then go on to manage the property. Wind Companies, as a company, holds on to its properties to be a partner within the community in which it develops. And we still own properties that we developed 40, 50 years ago. And Wind Residential helps ensure that the properties continue to be a very successful asset in the community and make sure that the upkeep is done. We'll have on-site property management, on-site maintenance, which will deal with with all ongoing maintenance issues, and may keep the property looking good for its lifetime. Wind Development also is unique in that we have an in-house service department that also connects residents to services within the community, and helps make sure that people are successful once they move into our communities. Everyone ranging from from the lowest income to workforce and market rate residents, all of which are being targeted here in the community we're proposing here in Pawcatuck. And just to highlight one other property that we are working on and completing right now in East Haven, similar type of program in terms of the financing that we're using. The old East Haven High School building, which we are actually obtaining our certificate of occupancy on tomorrow. It's a 70-unit age-restricted property, and it's the first passive house, which is a green energy standard historic building in the state. It's one where we partnered with the town of East Haven to undertake this project and has been incredibly successful in terms of the reception we've gotten from residents in the community and from town officials who were very excited to see the former high school, which sat vacant for 20 years, be transformed into something that's really an asset to the community. And for this effort, we were recently awarded with Affordable Housing Finance Magazine's Best Overall Project and Best Green Project for 2020, which are both very competitive and highly sought after awards. So we're very proud of what we've been able to do in East Haven. And I encourage anyone who's in that part of the state to swing by the old high school to take a look at the quality of the product that Wynn develops and that we put together to show, we really are here to create something that's going to be something that Pawcatuck can be proud of for a very long period of time. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul Vitaliano from.
I'm just going to say,
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Paul, if you thank you, Matt, that was really helpful. Paul, could you share the existing conditions plan at this time with the commission? If you could just bear with us, we're trying to get a plan up on the screen for you. Thank you. So before you is a aerial photo of the site. You can see it outlined in blue. That is our project site. This is a aerial photo of the far eastern edge of town. You can see the Pawcatuck River running through the center of the project. You can see the Amtrak rail line. North is on the right side of the photo. The up is actually west. And you can actually see the Westerly train station just to the north along the rail tracks as well. As you're aware, and I think as Matt indicated in his presentation, the site that we're talking about tonight and where we're trying to develop this affordable housing project in Pawcatuck is the historic Campbell Grain Mill property. And as many of you know, the historic mill the complex was severely damaged back in 2010 from flooding, and it was subsequently deconstructed and ultimately demolished starting in 2016. The existing property, if you're familiar with it, if you've had a chance to go out there, you know it's currently vacant. And all that really remains is the remaining foundations of the former mill building and a small garage. The site itself, again, outlined in blue on this drawing, is comprised of 2 parcels, just under 2 acres of land in size, and it has direct access from the end of Cogswell Street, as well as an easement, an access easement over adjacent property and alleyway out to West Broad Street. And again, for those of you who've had a chance to familiarize yourself with the site, you know that it's tucked away behind other buildings along West Broad Street. And it's adjacent to and actually below the grade of the Amtrak line that runs directly to the west. The property also has about 240 feet of frontage on the western bank of the Pawcatuck River, but that frontage is generally quite steep down to the river. It is actually supported with retaining walls and rock in places. Currently, this is a blighted property. It is underutilized. It is generally unproductive. And I think we can all agree it does nothing to support the surrounding neighborhood. Consequently, this property was actually identified as a priority for redevelopment by the town and was actively marketed by the Economic Development Commission to provide new and much needed affordable housing opportunities to support the ongoing economic revitalization of Pawcatuck. As you heard already tonight, my client specializes in mixed income development. Feedback there from somebody. I'll keep going. So we became interested in the property, and we actually put it under contract and have it under contract with the current owner. Paul, can you switch to the site plan layout? Keith, I don't know if you can maybe whoever's giving the feedback.
I lost my controls here for a second. So if everyone out there can please remember to mute yourself, whether you're on the computer or a phone, because we hear the background noise and it makes it hard to hear.
Going. So before you now is a drawing. There's an awful lot of feedback. Does everybody else hear the same stuff right here?
Yes. I'm trying to find the offender and mute them, but
I think it's Frank DeSantis.
okay. So Frank, if you're out there, if you can please mute yourself. It looks like you're signed in 2 different ways, maybe on computer and by telephone. And if both of those could be muted, that would help. All right, that seems to be better.
All right, I will try to move forward. So what you have now is a schematic of the site plan layout of the site, and the proposed development that we're putting forward tonight. We're going to go into it with much more detail for you. It's comprised of a 5-story apartment building with 4 stories of multifamily rental units built atop a parking garage. The entire structure is built into the hillside below the Amtrak line into that existing grade, and is quite frankly in a similar location as the old Campbell Grain Mill. We have a total of 93 parking spaces serving the development. About a little bit less than half are in the parking garage below the structure, and the rest are in surface parking in front of the site. And as Paul's going to point out in a couple minutes, we have both indoor and outdoor amenity spaces along the river, as well as other common areas in the building. And as I mentioned before, this is a mixed income project. And I think it's important to make sure that everybody's aware that in such developments, all of the units that we're proposing are the same in terms of the quality and the finishes of the unit. But only a designated percentage of the units have income restrictions attached to them, and the remainder are to be leased at market rates. Just to give you a little bit of idea of when I talk about market rates and I talk about affordable housing, today the average median income, which we also call AMI, for a 4-person household in the Stonington area is $91,800 a year. And to qualify as an affordable housing project under Connecticut law, this property will be subject to a restrictive covenant for 40 years. It will require 30%. I'll try to keep going if I can. So this restrictive covenant will be on the property for 40 years. It will require at least 30% of the housing units to be leased to households with an income of 80% of that average median income or less. As I mentioned, Wind Development intends to utilize federal low-income housing tax credits as administered by the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority to finance this construction. Now, in the application we've put before you, which is a competitive process with CHFA, we're proposing that 30% of the units in this building will be leased at market rates. There'll be no income restrictions whatsoever. And then 70% will have some level of income restriction. We're going to have about 15% of the units leased at 80% AMI, 40% at 50% AMI, and 15% at 30% of AMI. From our perspective, that mix is going to do very well in the competitive process, and it'll garner the tax credits we need to make this project reality. But we also think that what's important, and I think this is really important for your review tonight, is what we're going to be able to create is a truly diverse and inclusive project by providing reasonably priced rental apartments, which are so badly needed in Stonington. These units are not going to be all income restricted, or they're not going to be set aside for a certain group of people. These units are going to be leased by professionals and working class residents. They're going to be leased by elderly and young people. They're going to be leased by private and government employees. And they're going to be leased to those who simply want a chance to live in quality housing here in Stonington, regardless of their socioeconomic background. Now, at the end of the presentation tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 830G process and how it creates flexibility in your zoning regulations to allow this type of development to happen. And ultimately, you'll be required, as Keith indicated, to grant approval tonight for the application unless there's legally sufficient substantive evidence that there's a threat to public health or safety posed by the project. That being said, we're here tonight to share with you these plans. We're going to go into some much more detail about them. We're doing that in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation. And because we believe this project will dramatically improve opportunities and diversity of housing in Stonington. And most importantly, though, and I think this is from a planning perspective and from the perspective of the commission, as important as the diversification of housing, there's going to be 80 new households that will also become residents of this project that will support the local businesses and the revitalization of downtown Pawcatuck. These 82 households are going to create a core and a catalyst for other redevelopment throughout this neighborhood. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Vitaliano. Paul's going to walk you through the layout and some of the engineering details, and then we'll shift to our other presenters, and I'll come back at the end of tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Bill. Once again, my name is Paul Vitaliano. I'm a civil engineer with VHB. We're located in Wethersfield, Connecticut. I'd like to briefly discuss basically three aspects of the site plan: the building location, the access and parking, and the green space and landscaping. And then after that, I'd just like to make a couple brief points regarding the grading and drainage and utilities. So regarding the building, what you see here in front of you is basically you see three colors. The pink area is the building itself. The gray area is the parking lot and the drive aisles, and the green is obviously the landscaping. So the building itself is, as was mentioned before, it's a ground floor parking with 4 stories of residential above it. It's built into the hillside. If you've been on site, you'll know that the majority of the site is relatively flat. Basically, if you're standing at this entry point location and looking to where the existing building is, it's relatively flat. But then you see a slope going up to the railroad tracks. There's actually a service road right now that comes up here. So there is some topography challenges because our building is situated right in that location. So in doing so, because of the irregularity of the shape of the lot and also that topography, as I mentioned, the building is built into that slope. So the ground floor parking is actually buried on the west side, which is the side that abuts the railroad tracks. So some other aspects of the building, the front entrance to the building is here. I'm sorry, right here. And our architects will speak more to that later. This is basically a smaller lobby area. That's only a portion of this front. And then the parking area is at a higher elevation, and its entry and exit point are in this location right here. Some of the other just small amenities that I'd like to point out, as I mentioned this, or maybe I did not mention this, lighter color here is sidewalk. So we have a covered bike area here for bike parking. Also, there's stairways on the side. These 2 stairs that you see on either side of the building are for emergency access only. As I mentioned, because of the shape of the lot and the topography, we're not able to have emergency fire access all the way around the building. So the fire department asked that we provide these stairs that will be blocked off for residents, but really just emergency for the fire department to access the rear of the building so that they could walk along the back and use ladders if they have to get to the upper stories. There's a few other concrete pads that you see here. This, for example, is a rollout area for our refuge, which is inside. Our garbage area and recycle area is inside our refuse area, sorry. And that those would be wheeled out on delivery days and picked up in this location. So we would not have a dumpster outside at all times. The access and the parking, we have 2 access points to the site, ingress and egress for vehicular traffic. Our main point of access is at the northernmost end of Cogswell Street. Cogswell is a dead-end street. There are obviously a few curb cuts here to the adjacent buildings. We will be entering this location where you could circulate the site in a counterclockwise motion with parking on either side. As you come around towards the front of the building, you will have the ADA accessible parking closest to the front door. Continue in this location, and as was mentioned before, you could enter into the lower grade parking area, which has 49 parking spaces, 44 surface spaces for 93 total. You could continue this way, and our second point of access and egress is along the alleyway. As Bill alluded to, this alley is not part of our property. However, there is an existing easement for a right of access. So we are planning to utilize that as a secondary point to exit the site and enter the site, and we'll discuss that more in the traffic portion of our presentation. Another key component to the site is pedestrian access. This is obviously in the heart of downtown. We expect that our residents will walk to the nearby parks and businesses and also to the train station. So we do have a sidewalk connection from our front lobby and along the front of the building that would continue through the site in this area here down to Cogswell, where it joins up with the existing sidewalk system that is currently there. And as we said, you could basically walk to the town and enjoy all the amenities that the town has to offer. In placing our sidewalk and considering this area really was part of our landscape design and planning. We know that the river has recently been designated a scenic waterway. We saw that river as an asset to this site. It really is an attractive feature. It kind of stands out, and it's something that we want to enhance and really focus on. So what we're doing with the sidewalk is we're creating kind of a river walk here, where instead of having the sidewalk tucked in close to the parking lot, we're basically extending it so you are walking along the river. We're having a couple of benches here where you could sit and rest and look out over the river. There is going to be a decorative fence here for safety reasons. One really great aspect that we were able to bring on this site, as Bill mentioned, it really is blighted and has been really through the years. It's been either broken up asphalt or debris from what was previously there. And we're able to provide the screen buffer area, which currently does not exist. So we're able to enhance that visually, and also from an environmental standpoint and water quality aspect to the river, it really does provide a good buffer and serves those purposes. We wanted to leave some green space here so it would be open and flexible space to be used by the tenants in a variety of manners. Being open, it will kind of develop organically as to how that is used by the residents. And this is also within the buffer area. I'm sorry, the easement area that Bill mentioned. That would be granted to the town in case in the future there is a pedestrian connection across the river. It would be in this location, and we would provide those accommodations with the easement to facilitate that connection. Another important aspect of our landscape design is this upper area here. I'm going to attempt to zoom in here. Hopefully this doesn't bog down too much. So basically, this is an amenity space for the residents. It's accessible only from inside the building. That'll be discussed more by Jay when he goes over the architecture. But this is a common space area here, and we would basically like our residents to access the outside from there and enjoy this patio area, some green space, and then also what's basically a scenic overlook to the river right here. What you see here in brown is the existing old railroad abutment. The railroad tracks used to not be in their current location. Obviously, they used to come through the site like this, and the the abutment is still there. It's a very nice feature. It's historically, very interesting to look at and to think about what things were like back then. So we're keeping that abutment, and we're placing some benches and a patio up here to create that scenic overlook. Additionally, as I mentioned, there is that slope change across the site. So what we're doing is we're taking some of the on-site boulders, which if you're on site, you could actually see them. Right now, they're kind of used as a retaining wall as well. And we want to create a terraced wall system to get up to that upper level. And we would landscape that in this fashion with a mix of shrubs, trees, to kind of just enhance that area as opposed to just having a green slope or some kind of new retaining wall. We really thought that'd be a very aesthetically pleasing aspect to bring into the project. So aside from that, I just want to touch upon some key points regarding our grading and drainage and our utilities. Some of the things that were mentioned in the staff report, but I'll just briefly go over them. The site is located within the 100-year floodplain. That is at elevation 10. Currently kind of goes through the site, basically along our parking area. What we have done is we have provided compensatory storage. So we've provided volume calculations to demonstrate that we are not taken away from the flood storage capacity that is there today. Also, our building is at elevation 11, so it is 1 foot above that flood elevation. As I mentioned, that's just the lobby that is at elevation 11. The parking garage is at 15, and obviously the residential floors are above that. We did get concurrence from the town's reviewing engineer that our compensatory storage was adequate and that our building is above the one foot above the flood level. From a drainage and water quality standpoint, we feel that we are making great improvements to the site. There's obviously no landscaping on the site at the moment, and you can see that we are adding landscaping, which will enhance the water quality. Also, currently the runoff just sheet flows off the edge of the riverbank. It has created some erosion in some spots. What we're going to do, obviously, with the curbing that we're proposing around the parking lot and our catch basin inlets, excuse me, we're going to collect that water and then treat it in a water quality unit prior to connecting to the stormwater system in Cogswell Street that will eventually discharge to the river. We do have approval from the Inland Wetland Commission to actually upsize the pipe that discharges to the river, which is causing some flooding on the town road. And by fixing that pipe, we'll be able to alleviate that concern. So we feel that with the water quality unit, with our catch basins, the deep sumps they will have, the increased landscaping, that we will be significantly improving water quality as it discharges into the river. A couple other just housekeeping items. We did receive confirmation from the WPCA that the sewage waste generated from the site could be accepted and handled and will not have a negative impact on the community system. Also, a water model was completed by the applicant at the request of the water company, and it demonstrated that a new water line connection to West Broad Street will provide adequate flow and pressure to service the fire needs of the building. So having said that, be happy to answer any questions now or at a later time. Otherwise, I could turn it over to Bill.
Are there any questions at this time?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Chuck Shan.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Vitaliano. Very helpful, particularly as it relates to the proposed building's elevation with respect to the 100-year flood. My question relates to the parking areas and access to the site. Are any of those areas either for pedestrian travel or vehicular travel blocked by the 100-year flood?
Yes, the 100-year flood really encompasses a majority of the downtown area. It's really not unique to this site. It is elevation 10, which does basically take up this basically half of the parking lot. And really everything, it is important to note that it does take up everything to the east of that and also to the south. So at the 100-year flood level, which is 10, by the time you get to to the end of Cogswell Street and West Broad Street, you're looking at elevations as low as 6 and 7. I don't have them exactly. I can look, but basically they are lower than the flood elevation. So one interesting aspect about this when we started to look at that is that this building is actually unique for the area in that it's actually one of the few buildings that is above the flood elevation. So to answer your question, that 100-year flood would flood Cogswell Street and, for that matter, a lot of West Broad Street.
To what depth?
It varies. As I said, the flood elevation is 10, and I believe when you come over to this area of West Broad Street, you're in the 6 and 7 range. So
I can't tell what you're pointing out there.
I'm sorry. When you're at basically the intersection of Cogswell Street and West Broad Street.
Okay.
At that point, I could certainly double check that for you and come back later in the presentation, sir. But I'm fairly certain that we are looking at elevation 6 and 7 when you get to that intersection.
Okay. So a emergency vehicle or a fire truck or an ambulance would have to go through 3 feet of water to get to this building if indeed 100-year flood conditions were prevailing.
As it would to have to go through all of downtown, yes.
Okay. That's it for now, Mr. Chairman. I may have other questions, but I'll allow other commissioners to speak right now.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time?
Hello, this is Lynn Conway. I have a couple of questions. So, could you expand on the lighting aspect in the parking lot or in the exterior of the building, including your patio area?
Certainly. We are proposing light poles that you see. I'm sorry, the image is regenerating, but you could see a few light poles throughout the site. They are located on the site plan. We did submit a photometric plan. Those light poles are 20-foot tall max. They are a decorative fixture and pole, more of a modern look. I actually have that. I have an image for you here that I could switch over to in a moment. So this is obviously just a cut sheet from the manufacturer, but it's shown what the head of the fixture would look like. So it is meant to be a lower profile, lower light pole, more of a modern streamlined look. And those poles are shown. We don't have many of them, and there are wall packs associated with the building as well. At the moment, we have not considered any lighting along the walkway. And the patio area will probably be detailed out with just some soft lights or maybe some bollard lights, but nothing too major at this time has been considered for that area.
Can I ask how large that patio area is?
I believe it's around 500 square feet. I could come back to you with those exact dimensions.
And then if you could flip back to the schematic of the building, thank you so much. So I just want to, could you just tell me from the point of entry where you've got the majority of the parking spaces from the street, right, to the building itself? There, I see no sidewalks or anything. I mean, a person would have to cross the parking lot, cross the grass, get to the sidewalk, then go all the way around to get to the door. Is that correct?
Yes, when we looked at the sidewalk in this location, initially we had considered either a sidewalk right up against the parking here or right up against the parking here. As we've expressed, it really is very limited space-wise. There would just be enough room for sidewalk around this perimeter if we were to put that, and we would eliminate all of the landscaping. It's really that tight between our driveway to the property line. Luckily, it is flat, so we're able to accommodate that. What we considered when we had the sidewalk along this edge was that we really weren't taking advantage of the river and providing that open space and that opportunity to have seating areas and kind of that experience that we wanted our residents to have. And then we toured with 2 sidewalks, and we just felt it took away of too much of the green space. So what we settled on was having the sidewalk follow along to the river. And yes, having the residents for the spaces that are at least down here and the very few that are over in this location would have to walk across to the sidewalks that are in this location. Obviously, these 10 here are adjacent to a sidewalk system right here. And obviously the 49 that are in the parking garage, don't have that concern.
So it's approximately 30 spaces that really don't have the access to the closed sidewalk, correct?
There's 9 here, 4 here, 9 here, and 12 here. So
18,
34.
34. Yep. Okay.
Correct.
And if this was a standard commercial building or standard apartment building, is this the kind of configuration you would use for your sidewalks and the amount of sidewalks that would be available, or the distance between the sidewalk and the parking spots, or the access to the building? Consider this normal?
Yes, absolutely. We, one thing to be clear about is, I think you mentioned a standard residential project. We did not approach this in any different fashion as far as the fact that it's an 830G or it's considered, a mixed income. So there were no differences there, or we didn't approach the design in any different fashion. We approached it as we would for any type of residential building. Obviously, with the 830G program, we are able to bypass certain zoning regulations, certain setbacks that, such as, for example, parking between the building and the street. Something like that would not meet the zoning requirement. Because of the irregularity of the lot, we were forced to do that. But otherwise, as far as the dimensional requirements for the parking spaces, the drive aisles, the proximity to the sidewalks, we really would not have done anything different.
Okay, thank you for that.
Any other questions? Okay, continue. Hear none.
I'll jump back in, Mr. Chairman. This is Bill Sweeney, for the record. I just want to add one comment to add to Mr. Sheehan's question. Because of the fact that all of downtown Pawcatuck is affected by the 100-year floodplain, we've discussed with staff, and if you look in your staff report, you'll note that there is a recommended stipulation that a flood evacuation plan, which is what is appropriate when you don't have dry access per FEMA standards, be submitted to the Department of Planning prior to the issuance of a zoning permit. That plan includes the procedure in the event that we know we're having a 100-year flood, of alerting your residents, of having signage and directions on how to get them out of the building. And it's required these days, again, for any modern development that is in the floodplain. So that is something we've discussed with staff, and it is a stipulation. But with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our traffic engineer, Joe Balskis. Joe's going to talk to you now about his traffic impact study and some of the improvements that we're going to be making in West Broad Street in conjunction with the DOT. So with that, Joe.
Good evening. I'm trying to share my screen here. Can you all see that? Should be a PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So for the record, my name is Joe Balskis. I'm Director of Transportation Systems for VHB, as I'm working with Paul on this project. And as you know, we prepared a traffic study for this. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut. I'm also a nationally certified professional traffic operation engineer. And I've been to Stonington probably half a dozen times now over the last summer, coming to the site to observe traffic flow, traffic patterns, and also taking in some of the local restaurants. We have friends that live across the river in Rhode Island, so we're here quite frequently. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening out there. but I'm also willing to listen to any comments. So I'm going to give a brief presentation on a traffic impact and access study. I want to run through the existing conditions, talk about the traffic generation that we have, and recommendations that Bill talked about to address some existing conditions, and then review that concept, and finally be available for any questions you may have. So real quick, existing conditions. This is obviously map from our traffic study, and some of these graphics you'll see are taken right from the traffic study that was submitted in support of the application. And we looked at basically, obviously West Broad Street is front and center as the major roadway through Pawcatuck into Rhode Island. And we looked at two intersections, obviously Cogswell Street at West Broadway and Liberty and Mechanic Street intersection. Those are two intersections that we started looking at when we first started doing the study. And West Broad Street, again, I don't live here, but I've been here, like I said, 6 times in the last 4 months. And I don't have to tell you that it's a very busy corridor, especially during summertime, traffic peaks. It's a main connection to Rhode Island. The good thing is that we don't have traffic signals nearby. There's no traffic signals nearby except up at 234, within a mile of this downtown. And I think that's one reason why traffic flows fairly nicely through it. The speed limit is 25 miles an hour, as we know. For the most part, I've observed it several times at 30 miles an hour. I'm sure any off-peak late at night you can go faster, but the speeds actually were pretty impressive in terms of the adherence to the speed limit for the most part in the downtown area. And that resulted in the pedestrian crossings that are there, the 2 crosswalks, one at Cogswell, one at the mid-block down by Hoof's Restaurant. The vehicles actually have a high yielding rate. And we see that with lower speeds and roadways where the vehicles are going slower enough that they can yield. And so you see a lot of that. However, we have some restricted sight lines, and at Cogswell there's a sight line restriction going into Cogswell as well as coming out of Cogswell. And this picture is just an example of one of the sight line restrictions we have when you're leaving Cogswell, looking across the bridge into Rhode Island. If there's a car parked there in front of the restaurant, your sight line is essentially blocked or significantly reduced. So you've got to creep out a little more across the crosswalk in order to increase your sight line. This is the functional classification map from Connecticut DOT. The green indicates a minor arterial roadway, which is one step below a principal arterial and expressway. Mechanic Street shown up here as a collector, and Route 234 to the west is also shown as a collector. So it gives you the hierarchy of the roads, the local roads being like Cogswell, then a collector being Mechanic Street, and then obviously the arterial, then one step up to an expressway, just to give you the idea of the classification of roadways that we're talking about. And talk about traffic volumes. This is from the DOT website. The 2 stars indicate traffic volumes that Rhode Island DOT has provided to us. And then back in Connecticut, we in red there, you see the text. Those are pandemic level traffic volume. Those are from May of this year. About 9,000 on Liberty Street, which is Route 2, and about 16,000 on West Broad Street, another 4,000 vehicles per day. That's your average daily traffic on those roads back from May of 2020. So this is a snapshot of the DOT traffic count data that we gathered for the project. And on the left side, you see there's 2020, 2017, 2011, and 2008. And I highlighted there, the red circle, the 16,000 from back in May, 16,000 vehicles per day. You look back 3 years ago, it was 22,000 vehicles per day. And 2011 was 25,000 vehicles per day, the same time of year. So we've seen a reduction in traffic volumes on West Broad Street. We do know that the pandemic has reduced volume significantly. They're coming back up. We've seen data supporting that. It's within 20% of pre-pandemic levels. So traffic volumes come up. But the bottom line here is that you're looking at over 1,000, 1,500 cars in the peak hour on West Broad Street, and upwards between 16,000 and 22,000 vehicles per day on West Broad Street, especially in the summertime. And just give you another snapshot of the traffic volumes that we collected. So we also look at crash history for a traffic study. Look at the crash history for the last 3 full years, 2017 through 2019. We have not collected 2020 yet, and we don't see need to collect it yet. So we have basically 3 full years of data from the Yukon crash repository, and we see two dichotomies of crash rates in the study area. Cogswell Street has 15 crashes over 3 years. Almost all of them are rear ends, to be expected, even though it's lower speed. But Liberty Street, Mechanic Street has 44 crashes in over 3 years, and most of those are angle types. Most of them as a result of the crazy movements that are at the intersection. However, no serious injuries are reported. Most of these crashes at both intersections are property damage only with fender benders. So given the significance of crashes that we found looking at Liberty and Mechanic Street, we actually notified DOT. We actually reached out to DOT, our contacts at DOT, and made them aware of this. And they were concerned. They were surprised how many crashes were happening at the intersection. They acknowledged they looked at it in the past, but like anything, squeaky wheel goes to grease. They hadn't looked at it in a while. So they have actually agreed to start looking at this intersection of Mechanic Street, Liberty Street, and Route 2, Route 1. The Highway Management Unit at DOT is actually looking at it right now in terms of what can they do out there to address this obviously very apparent crash problem, significantly higher than we have at Cogswell Street. And this is just a graph. This is from the traffic study showing the number of crashes in each year at each intersection. Cogswell's to the left and Liberty Mechanic Street's to the right. So next thing we talk about is traffic generation. How much traffic is this development going to generate? And we use the national manual, the trip generation manual from the Institute of Transportation Engineers to guide us, provide us information on trip generation for new developments. And in this manual, which has been in place now for, I guess, over almost 30 or 40 years, there's literally thousands of studies that are done at various land uses across the country. And just in residential, you see here, there's over a dozen of residential type uses that we can pick from as traffic engineers to see what kind of development do we have and what are the studies showing in terms of generation for the peak hours and the daily. And what we chose here, even though there isn't affordable housing, the land use listed here, there's only been 2 developments that have been studied. So we discarded that because there's a limited amount of data. But we looked at the multifamily housing low rise. We're using that one for this because it's most appropriate, it has lots of studies across the country, and it's very reliable data for us to use. The ITE Trip Generation Manual is also approved by the State of Connecticut Office of State Traffic Administration. So the methodology employed here is what they approved as part of the applications. So essentially DOT and OSTA approved this land use analysis. So this also presents us with an estimate of traffic generation. So what does that all mean? So using the trip generation manual, we calculate based upon the units being developed, being proposed here, we have about 30, at most 30 vehicles being generated in the peak hour in the morning and about 36 in the afternoon peak hour. And you can say, well, Joe, you got almost 80 plus units here. That doesn't ring true. Well, they're not, all the traffic being generated is not being generated in 1 hour. You have traffic before the peak hour, then the peak hour, and afterwards. So it's spread out over several hours. But the peak hour is what we look at as traffic engineers to see what's the highest number of vehicles being generated. So, in the morning, you see here we have 22 vehicles exiting, 7 coming in. In the afternoon, we have the reverse, 23 entering and 13 exiting. And over the course of the day, we have 445 daily trips. So I was talking about 16,000. I was talking about 22,000, 25,000 trips, vehicles per day on West Broad Street. We're talking about a fraction of traffic being generated on a daily basis from this development, and the peak hour is even less. So what does that all mean? Where are they all going? How do we know as engineers where traffic is going? That's always the question we have. Where is our new traffic going to go? So we looked at the U.S. Census for Journey to Work data for Stonington in Rhode Island and to see where this traffic could be going. And basically, based on that data we looked at, it looks like in terms of the location of this development, the type of development it is, and the road system that we have, about 13% going into Rhode Island. And the rest of it is staying in Connecticut, or at least staying in Connecticut in terms of travel. About 8% going up Route 2 to 95 towards Providence, and the rest of it, 71% going west towards Mystic, towards 234 to 95 south, towards the Groton area. So that's what we're seeing for traffic distribution from our traffic. So when I'm saying 30 cars being generated and we have 22 leaving in the morning, so of that 22, you're looking at 16 or 17 turning right out and going west, and we have 5 going left possibly into Rhode Island. So we're talking about very, very low volumes of traffic being generated and being distributed to the roadway network. So then we do capacity analysis, the intersections. And the methodology we use is the Highway Capacity Manual. Again, that's approved by OSTA as well as Connecticut DOT. We look at the morning peak hour and afternoon peak hour, as I mentioned, the commuting peak hour. And we looked at We didn't look at Liberty Mechanic Street because DOT is actually looking at that. The DOT is actually studying that, so we did not do capacity analysis there, even though the traffic volume is very light there, but DOT is looking at it, so we said let them look at that. We focus on Cogswell Street and the Cogswell Street approach, since West Broad Street is free-flowing. We looked at the existing, we looked at the no build, which is just prior to the project opening, and obviously the build. And from our analysis, we didn't see any changes in level service. Now, what is level service? I put it in writing here exactly what it is. But it's basically a gradation of A to F in terms of the operation of your intersection or your approach, with A being the best and F being the worst. But we didn't see any change in the level of service, the calculation that we made for Cogswell Street. We did see a small increase in the queuing, which you can expect for vehicles trying to turn out of Cogswell. So there is a small increase about a vehicle, but we didn't see anything significant, if you will, in terms of 10, 12 additional vehicles queuing or reduction in level service. So we didn't see that, and that's indicative of the low volumes that are being generated by the project. So we focus on Cogswell. While we saw Cogswell not necessarily having capacity issues, we saw issues with some deficiencies, and one being the sightline restriction I just mentioned, the sightlines of trying to turn into Cogswell because you can't see oncoming traffic ahead of you. We also saw a need to reduce the crosswalk lengths. The crosswalk lengths across West Broad Street are longer than they really should be. So we looked at that. So our recommendations were to address our traffic being generated as well as to address the existing conditions. We looked at restriping West Broad Street. We looked at creating bypass for a left turn into Cogswell, relocating the crosswalks, adjusting the pedestrian ramp, and also adjusting the parking zones on the change, and finally adjusting the stop bar. So let me show you a plan. This is an engineered plan. This is based on an actual survey. This plan was in the actual traffic report. This kind of shows you graphically, but I want to show you real quick the actual engineered plan from the survey. So this shows the detail of the intersection, existing conditions, and our proposed changes for the intersection. So what you can see here is the proposal for making room for left turners into Cogswell involves some restriping of the center lines of West Broad Street and the on-street parking, not reducing the on-street parking, but restriping it. And then by also doing that, we allow for a wider eastbound lane into Rhode Island, so that a vehicle may turn into Cogswell, and while that vehicle is waiting for a gap, turning, then a through vehicle into Rhode Island can then bypass that vehicle safely and can carry on without stopping traffic along West Broadway. And we also looked at, by doing that, moving the crosswalk that's there today. It's a very long crosswalk. It's like 86 feet long across the roadway. Moving that to the east side of the intersection, so it's shorter by a good 10 or 12 feet. And even though we have lower speeds here and the vehicles do yield pedestrians, anytime we can get a reduction in crossing distance for a pedestrian, the safer it is for that pedestrian, they're less exposed to traffic flow. And then we also looked at the crosswalk on Cogswell and the stop bar, trying to pull that stop bar out into the intersection to maximize that sight distance for the left turners out of Cogswell, while retaining on-street parking there for the police department, as well as retaining all on-street parking. We're shifting the on-street parking along the park by the bridge on the south side. We're not changing that with the memorial over there. We're shifting it around, moving around a little bit, putting the catch basin, keeping the tree there. We're not impacting the trees. And on the north side, we're not impacting the parking as well by the restaurant. We're gonna rebuild the handicap ramp there on these three corners, but we're not going to be impacting the on-street parking. So there's no reduction in on-street parking from this proposal. So what does that do? Basically, in this color figure here, that's in the report, it allows you to, you can see it more clearly how we are shifting parking and shifting the crosswalk as well as the stop bar. And what it provides is a cleaner flow of traffic through the intersection, keeps speeds slower. It allows us also to accommodate trucks. So you see in this figure right here, you can see the outline of a tractor trailer. We're still able to accommodate tractor trailers through this. And I didn't see too many through the intersection when I was out there, but I'm sure they do come along through here because it is a national highway system highway. So we're able to accommodate the trucks and maintain the on-street parking, as well as maximizing the spacing for left turners into Cogswell. So what does that all mean in summary? So the existing conditions of Cogswell I talked about, with some deficiencies, we're going to address those. We have very low traffic generation. We have 30 cars at most 22 cars coming out in the morning peak hour, coming in the morning, in the afternoon peak hour. So very low number of traffic being generated by this development. We're going to mitigate that traffic and address the existing conditions with that concept plan improvements I just went through. We have no change in level of service. And then finally, as stated in the report, the traffic generated by this proposed site will not adversely impact traffic operations. And with that, I'll take any questions or go to the next presenter. And I guess I can leave my screen up if there's any questions.
This is Lynn Conway. I have a question. So I see that you did account for COVID. My question is, when you did your counts, did you do them on the weekends or did you do them during the week?
So these counts from Connecticut DOT are a weekday count, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, you can see here. So the DOT counts on weekdays, and going back several years, they counted during the weekday. I was also out there counting myself. It was July 2nd. It was Friday, July 2nd. I was out there myself, and I've been out there on the weekend. Although I didn't do an actual count on the weekend, I was there on the weekend seeing the traffic flow on the weekend. I was actually surprised that it wasn't much different than what I saw on Friday when I was out there in August. But no, we did not do an actual count on a summertime weekend. We counted on a Friday afternoon, as well as we utilized the DOT counts for during the week.
So my experience is that it is during the weekends. It's the beach traffic of people coming off of Route 1, that it clogs in that area. It's often backed up, past the gas station, etc. So I'm not sure that these numbers actually reflect peak. Certainly, I believe during the weekday, people going to work, etc. On a Wednesday, it's very, very different from a Saturday or a Sunday in June, July, August. Probably it's over in September, at this point. So is there any kind of a factor that you would put in, or is there other data that you could use that would reflect those kind of peak numbers?
So the DOT data actually is reflective of seasonal data, as you're saying there. That's why the DOT counts are in August. So when they're saying 25,000 cars per day in 2011, 20,000 cars per day in 2017, they account for the seasonal variation of traffic. Even though it's a weekday, they account for the seasonal variation of traffic because this area is obviously a summertime travel. So they do account for that. We do not have counts from the summer of 2019 or 18 or 17 or even 2020. And I've cautioned against doing that because of the current situation we have with the pandemic. The counts may not be totally reflective. So we use the data we have available to us and obviously observation. So I will also say that, in terms of the residential, the generation, you're going to see less traffic being generated on the weekends. For residential, we actually don't usually look at weekend traffic. If we're doing retail, we would absolutely look at a weekend traffic, and I'd be talking a different story about a retail development in terms of traffic generation and doing a weekend count. But for residential, we always look at the Monday through Friday because that's the highest generation for residential is a weekday as opposed to a weekend. But I do agree with you that the weekend volume is definitely higher, and I think the improvements that we've identified here will certainly facilitate the traffic flow through the intersection, especially allowing any left turners into Cogswell to be able to allow the through traffic to go through the intersection better.
I would agree with you, except these people are living in an apartment building in a beach town, and if they have the weekend off, they're going to be going to.
Well, they may be, but they're not going to be all piling into the cars at the same time. So yes, they like I said, we have 400 cars being generated over the course of the day. That's over 24 hours. So yes, they are going to be using their cars, and hopefully they're doing a lot of walking. Hopefully they're doing a lot of walking in the area and riding their bikes. But my point is that it won't be concentrated. That you have all 82 units emptying out in 1 hour. It's going to be spread out, and that's with any residential development. It's all spread out over the course of several hours. So I understand what you're saying. I don't think it changes the conclusion of the traffic study. I will also say that DOT doesn't. I don't think they've ever counted on the weekends. They always look to the weekday because that's the DOT's highest volumes are on a weekday. But if we had volume, we look at it. But I will say that, in terms of the amount of volume we're seeing here, I'm comfortable with what we're proposing for improvements. We'll address the traffic flow during the peak hours, and the weekend. The traffic being generated is much less. How much less can you go? It's much less than we have in terms of the morning, afternoon, peak hours.
Thank you.
David here. In my opinion, the weekend problem is not in Connecticut. It's McQuaid's and Westerly. Once you get past that, there's all stopping to make a left-hand turn. It backs everything up. But have you taken into consideration the drive-through at the donut shop?
Yeah, actually, we did. I mean, the traffic count I was doing on a Friday afternoon, I was there. I was actually watching that traffic flow come in Cogswell and turn into the drive-through and going out the drive-through and going out coming out again through Cogswell. So I absolutely observed it. In fact, a lot of the volume that I was counting on Cogswell was related to the donut shop, actually. So we actually did account for that.
This is Ben. I have a question for you. Have you broken down how many people would be going out of the alleyway, that right of access, versus Cogswell?
Great question. So we did not assume traffic leaving through the alleyway for a distinct purpose of trying to be conservative of our impact to Cogswell. So yes, we think people will access the alleyway. I don't think it's going to be a lot. I think it's going to be self-regulating. That's the police chief and I were talking about at the last week. I guess it was last week. We did not account for it in our analysis. I think that will happen, but I think it's going to be self-regulating, and we have a conservative analysis assuming all traffic is going to go be accessing the site through Cogswell, entering and exiting.
But will the alleyway be marked as? I mean, it's not going to be discouraged by your apartment building, will it?
No.
Will it be encouraged?
No. The encouragement will be to use. We're spending money on the improvements to the intersection. So, from my standpoint, coming out of the alleyway, it'll be easier to come out of Cogswell with these improvements as well, and it'll be easier to get into the site coming into Cogswell now with these improvements. Because turning left into the alleyway will be challenging. And it's challenging today with oncoming traffic, and so the improvements we're making will make it easier and facilitate the left turns into Cogswell from West Broad Street. So we're addressing that. So yeah, I mean, people will use the alleyway. I'm not going to tell you they're not going to. I think it'll be more enticing to use Cogswell because of the improvements that we are proposing to do with the intersection.
And one last question for you. That walkway right across the middle of the curve, whether it's in your new location or in the old location, wouldn't it make more sense to put almost 2 crosswalks pushing away from the middle of that curve? If they both be shorter.
So in a signalized intersection, we would consider that a signalized, but not being signalized. This crosswalk has the safest conflicts, if you will, versus the existing crosswalk. So again, signalized, yes, you can do that, but I would not do that in an unsignalized intersection location. We want to have one crosswalk, concentrate the crossers where it's safest for them to cross, and where it's the shortest distance. If you start moving it to the west or east more, then you're looking more at a mid-block crossing, and mid-block crossings are shunned upon. You want to avoid those where possible. And that's why, in fact, this proposal here, you see, we actually have like a buffer island. You can get in the middle of the road there, and there's a 6.5 foot buffer. So if by chance you are caught there, you could stand there, and it's 6 feet, which is the minimum you want to have. But at least you have something there that can provide a buffer. But again, if you're crossing during the peak hours or during the day, vehicles are going to yield. I said before, I was very pleasantly surprised how much yielding was going on, which is a good thing for pedestrian safety. And that's why we don't have any pedestrian crashes here. There's no pedestrian crashes here in the crash data. So that's a result of the lower speeds. And lower speeds means it's easier to yield and people don't get hurt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other questions.
I have a question, please. Stephen Capizano. Hi, Joe.
Excuse me. You'll have the other question later. This is just for the members' time. We'll have it.
Oh, my apologies. My apologies.
Okay. Thank you.
If there's no other questions from the commission, I'd like to introduce Jay Szymanski, who is the architect for the project. Just to give you a sense, and again, architecture and landscape design issues are not within the jurisdiction of the Commission on Affordable Housing Projects, but we want to show you the work we've done on the building and what we're proposing to give you an idea of how it all lays out. So with that, I'll introduce.
Thanks, Bill. For the record, my name is Jay Szymanski. I'm an architect with the architectural team. And I want to briefly go through sort of the progression of the design and explain how we got to where we are today. So whenever we approach a site, we look at constraints and also opportunities. So in this particular case, the geometry of the site is kind of a constraint. It's an odd geometry. It's very linear. We also look at topography on the site. So in this case, there's some existing slope from the western portion of the site to the east, and it's significant. It's from this high point to the lowest point here, it's about a 25-foot difference in grade. The train tracks to the west obviously provide some constraints there, so we need to think about mitigation for sound and vibration. We look at access points. So in this case, we have primary access from Cogswell Street here, but there's also secondary access, as was mentioned here, from Broad Street over this right of way. But then we look at opportunities as well. So in this case, we have the amenity of the Pawcatuck River to the north, and we also have this existing abutment, which could be seen as a constraint, but in our case, we're actually trying to use that as an opportunity to enhance the site. So in addition to looking at the site itself, we look at the history of the site. So in this case, New England towns in riverfront locations often bring up images of mill buildings. So these are just some images of some mills in the area. Of note, I think they typically have a very linear massing. They often have flat or low slope roofs. Detailing of mill buildings is usually very simple, and window patterns is often very repetitive. These are just a couple other examples of mills in the area. So we want to try to use some of those forms and some of those ideas to influence our design, not necessarily make our building look like a mill, but use some of those concepts and do it in a more contemporary way. So back to the site itself, I mentioned it's a sort of linear site, so we want to take advantage of that. So our first placement of the building was sort of back in a linear fashion, sort of north-south. We want to use the slope as best we can, so we want to tuck that building into the slope and use the building itself as a retaining wall. We want to take advantage of the amenities of the river, and by doing that, we want to place the residential amenity areas on that end of the building, both the interior amenities and also the exterior amenities. And then using the access that we have off Cogswell, the parking would generally wrap around the site in this location. So if we take that same view and rotate it into a 3D image, you get something like this. It's a long linear bar running generally north to south. And then we take that massing and start to sculpt it. So we want to add depth to that, break up that long linear mass. But in doing that, we create opportunities for the residential units. So as we pull and push the mass, we create corners in the buildings. And those corners create opportunities for views from residential units inside. So in this case, these corners create views towards the river. Our next development of that massing was to sort of look at the program of the building and separate the different uses through the massing. So in this case, we have 4 floors of residential units that sit above a garage. So we want to use that mass to actually demonstrate or sort of project what's going on inside the building. So in this case, we recess that ground floor so the residential floors above sort of hover above that. Sort of the next iteration of that, we took the long linear massing and tried to break that up by adding some vertical recesses. And in some cases, those recesses relate to what's happening inside. So for example, we have an existing stair in this location. So we don't need windows in that location. So we can use that to create some articulation in the facade. This is actually where the elevator shafts are. So again, we don't need windows in that location, so that we can use that as part of the articulation of the facade. And then we apply colors and textures. In this case, we were trying to create some movement across the length of the building. So we took a color and used sort of slight gradations of that color to go from darkest on this end to lightest closest to the river. So again, we're trying to create some visual motion across the facade. And then we want to do a similar thing with textures. So we'll get into it a little bit later, but we want to use simple materials but create some patterns that move across the facade. And then we want to create some hierarchy as well. So we added some detailing, some cornice work, and some banding in specific locations to create some hierarchy. So in this case, the main entrance to the site is here. So this is a pretty important corner. So we added a cornice here across the roof line, and it actually turns down and wraps around. This being the main entrance to the building is also a more important section. So again, we added a cornice line there that drops, and then we created an extended sort of entry lobby here that we also wanted to highlight. So all of those things come together, gives us a form, something like this that you see. And we also have the landscaping overlaid on this. You can see how the whole site comes together. You can also see how we're reusing that abutment here to create that upper terrace that's been talked about. That really serves as the outdoor residential amenity space. Again, access from Cogswell and secondary access down the right of way here. As far as the floor plans go, on the bottom is the lobby and garage level. So as has been mentioned, our lobby is here at elevation 11. So that's 1 foot above the flood elevation. Within that lobby, we have a small management office and leasing office. We also have a mail and package room there. The lobby connects to 2 elevators here that serve the upper floors. And it also serves the garage level that's actually 4 feet higher than the lobby. So the garage is up, the parking is up at elevation 15, accessed by this sloped entry here. On the south end of the building, we have sort of back of house areas. So that's also down at elevation 11. So we have a trash and recycle room here, where we have 2 compactors which collect trash from trash chutes that are located on the upper floors. So we compact trash and recycling into bins that are wheeled out this end of the building for pickup. And the main electric room is also in this corner of the building. We've talked about the stair access on either end of the building to provide pedestrian access to the back of the building, primarily for emergency, for fire. Moving up to level 2, we have a pretty typical double loaded corridor situation where we have a corridor down the middle accessed by the elevator lobby with residential units on both sides of that corridor. On this end of the building, in order to take advantage of the river, we located our residential amenity spaces. So we have a club room or a lounge here on the end and a fitness room. I did want to note that these units, there's 6 units down on this end of the level 2, where the floor of these units is about 7 feet below the grade. As I mentioned, this is the highest point of the grade on the site in this corner. So we created this retaining wall here, which creates private terraces for these 6 units. So each of these units have their own little terrace to provide light and air to those units because they're somewhat below the grade level. These are pretty typical levels 3 and 4. Again, double loaded corridors, corridor right down the middle with residential units on either side. It's a mix of studios, 1 bed, 2 bed, and 3 bedroom units. Level 5, and also the roof plan. So we did cluster mechanical equipment as best we can in 2 locations here and here. Moving on to the exterior elevations. So this is the front elevation, if you will, where we have a 5-story exposure with the garage on the lowest level, 4 floors of residential above, with the lobby more or less in the middle of the building, garage access here. This is now the rear elevation facing the tracks on the west side. You can see here dashed in, which is the areaway that I mentioned with these level 2 units accessing those private terraces. And then the 2 end elevations. This is the end facing West Broad Street. You can see the stair connection there going up the slope. And then, of course, the river elevation here, again, with the emergency access stair running up that slope. The ground floor is where the amenity spaces are. You can see it's much more glassy and transparent there, and that actually wraps around the corner here. That glass continues. And then as far as exterior materials go, the main field of the building that you see in these sort of progressing colors, those are all fiber cement lap siding. And I mentioned before the patterning that we're trying to do. So rather than do a typical 4-inch exposure all the way up the building, we're actually proposing varying those exposures. So we can use that to create some patterning and create, again, some visual movement across the building. But we're changing those patterns as we move from bay to bay. So you can see the spacing of it here is different than it is here, and different than it is here. So again, across the building, you don't have a consistent banding of those lap joints. It moves as you go across the building. Other materials, these vertical white stripes are the same fiber cement material, but it's done in a panel rather than a lap siding. Windows will be black, and there'll be a composite, a vinyl and PVC composite with either the awning or the casement portions of those being operable, depending on the format of the windows. On the ground floor where the garage is, we're proposing a vertical seam metal panel. So these have some ribs in them that vary in width. So again, similar to what we're doing with the lap siding, it's now turned vertically, but we're trying to create some texture across this ground floor. And we're also varying colors. So you see the 2 different colors in that metal panel happening here. Wrapping the lobby, we're using an aluminum metal panel. So it's basically a flat metal panel there. And we're also using that same material to create those cornice lines that wrap around this portion of the building and also this end. Those would be metal panel. Wrapping around the end of the building, same materials, same sort of patterning. And again, you can start to see here the residential amenity space that spills out onto the exterior terrace. As far as the visibility, as been mentioned, the building is pretty much tucked away behind some other existing buildings. So this is a view standing on the corner of West Broad in Cogswell. This is, of course, the existing condition, and this is the proposed. And you can see here, you can barely see the building. If you look very closely, you can just start to see the roof line, which comes across here. And of course, in the winter months, when you lose foliage on these trees, it will become more visible. But for the most part, it's pretty well tucked away. This is another view further down Cogswell. Again, the existing condition here, and then the proposed. What's important to note here is I talked a little bit about the mechanical equipment on the roof when we looked at the roof plan, but because of the distance that you are away from the building and because of the depth of the building and the location of that mechanical equipment, it's very difficult to see from the pedestrian level anywhere in the surroundings. You can see a little bit of it poking up here But for the most part, the mechanical equipment is pretty well screened. This is just another view of the end of the building, sort of looking across the river. And finally, the last slide is just a section cut through that retaining wall that I mentioned in the back corner of level 2. So this is the garage. This is a residential unit on level 2. You can see the grade here is about 7 feet above that floor line. So we're creating this retaining wall that creates this private patio for this particular unit. And that's the case for 6 of those units across that back corner. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill. That's really the conclusion of the architectural piece, and we're happy to take any questions.
Hi, this is Ben. I have a question. I know it's out of my jurisdiction, but is there any way to break up, I know you have on that lowest level, the parking area? It just seems like quite a gray barrier across the whole facade.
Yeah, and Bill mentioned we had a meeting last night with the Architectural Design Board, and some of those topics did come up, and we are looking into those sort of ways that we can maybe soften that ground floor. So we have discussed that.
And then secondly, have you considered solar on the top of the building? You have all that nice flat space, especially if Wynn is going to own the building. It might help reduce your electrical costs and some sort of credit with the state. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're considering. We haven't totally figured it all out yet, but again, condensing those mechanical equipment as much as we can provides as much open roof space as possible. So we would be interested in looking into solar.
Hello, this is Lynn Conway. Could you just review the emergency exits? I know you've got stairwells. You pointed out that you didn't need windows because you had stairwells, but could you just point that out? Yeah, right there on that one. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So on the upper floors, there's a stair on each end of the corridor. So there's one stair here and one here. Those empty out down into the garage level here, so you go directly out to the exterior. And then similarly, this stair comes down to grade and egress is here.
Thank you. And then how did you say the retaining wall for the terrace was 7 feet?
That's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions this time? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think at this point, if we can stop sharing that plan, Jay, and then I'll try to wrap this presentation up, and then we can open it up for general discussion. Again, I want to thank you for your time and attention this evening. As I said before, your review of our application is going to be quite a bit different than what you're normally used to for a special permit application. Connecticut's Affordable Housing Appeals Act allows developers who are proposing qualifying residential projects relief from the bulk, dimensional, and use provisions of your zoning regulations. And as Keith indicated, in the simplest terms, the legislature here in Connecticut has determined that the future of the state depends on having affordable housing. And so that the state has effectively overridden your zoning authority for these types of projects. We're still required to apply before you. That's why we're here tonight. We have to go through your land use process, but we can only be denied on very narrow and limited grounds. I want to note that the act only applies to those towns that have not reached the minimum threshold of 10% of their housing stock as being deemed affordable by the state. Right now, based on last year's numbers, Stonington is at 5.93%, which makes you subject to the act. The good news is that well-designed affordable housing projects in the right location, and we certainly believe our project is one of those projects, increases the overall count of affordable housing in your community and gets you closer to that 10%, so that one day you can be on the exempt list and you don't have to worry about a bad project going in a bad location. We've submitted in compliance with 830G an affordability plan that's part of our the record. That plan has the minimum requirements called out in state statutes. It provides for the designation of the affordable units, construction details, sample deed restrictions, lease restrictions. It has administrative and compliance provisions, marketing plan, tenant eligibility, all the things that we have to show you to be eligible under 830G. And as I said before, the affordability plan calls for 70% of our units in this project to meet the state's definition. And that's going to be in place for 40 years under a deed restriction on the property. But tonight, in terms of what your role is, while multifamily residential dwellings are permitted in the PB5 district, the application we've submitted does not comply with certain aspects of your regulations. We certainly are proposing a greater density than would normally be allowed. Our building is 2 feet taller than it should be allowed for a straight multifamily building. And as Mr. Vitaliano indicated, our parking layout doesn't meet your configuration requirements. But that is completely acceptable under Section 830G, and it cannot be a basis for denying the application. Likewise, we believe in our application materials, we've shown that we've met all your special permit criteria, even though they're really not applicable to your decision-making process unless they involve health and safety issues. It's important to remember that under Section 830G, the burden of proof shifts, and it shifts from the applicant to the commission. It's completely reverse from any other land use project that you review. You are actually required to grant us approval except where you can prove, based on evidence in the record, that a denial is necessary to protect substantial public interests in health and safety. And as you know, substantial evidence is not conjecture, it's not feelings, it's not anecdotes, but it's reliable expert testimony. Testimony like you heard tonight from our civil engineer, our professional traffic engineer, our licensed architect. It is information that establishes the facts of the matter and the impacts of the activity. More importantly, even if there was evidence in the record that there was a public safety or health issue, you must still approve our application unless you can demonstrate that the public interest in health and safety clearly outweigh the community's need for affordable housing. And going even further, would also need to demonstrate that such public interest in health and safety cannot be protected by reasonable changes or stipulations of approval. This is a really, really high legal standard, and our courts have made it very clear that affordable housing developers are to be given approvals for these situations, except in the most egregious cases where there's clear threats to public health and safety. Now, while the legal framework is clear, we don't think this should be a hard deliberation because there's very good reasons to support and approve this project, regardless of Section 830G. I would submit to you tonight that this project is completely consistent with your plan of conservation and development. We are cleaning up a blighted property and revitalizing an abandoned mill site. We are creating new public open space opportunities, scenic views, and linkages along the Pawcatuck River. We're attracting new residential development to support the historic downtown of Pawcatuck. And we're redeveloping floodplain properties in compliance with modern floodplain construction standards. As you heard from our engineer, the entire neighborhood of Pawcatuck floods in the 100-year storm. We're going to be one of the only buildings that actually meets FEMA floodplain construction standards. The affordable housing we're building will make great strides in diversifying your housing opportunities in both a style of housing and the income levels that they're targeted to. And we're promoting walkable infill green building development. And our work on West Broad Street, which Mr. Balkus talked about, is going to improve the safety of both vehicular and pedestrian connections between Pawcatuck and Westerly. And it's going to make the proposed conditions that we're putting forward are actually better than the existing situation. Further, as some of you might be aware, Stonington is currently out of compliance with state requirements to have a fully adopted affordable housing plan. But this project is consistent with the draft work the town has already completed toward this goal. Both the 2008 Housing Affordability Report, which was never adopted, and the more recent 2018 report, which I would ask be entered into the record by reference, both identify Pawcatuck, including this site, as having a high potential for affordable housing. And both documents direct the town to guide developers to these areas. Finally, tonight, as I wrap up, I just want to thank First Selectman Cheeseborough, Chairman Hammond of the Economic Development Commission, and the entire planning staff for their support of our efforts. I leave you with this. The other night before the police commission, one of the commissioners made a very important point, and I think it's important to reiterate at this hearing. During this very difficult time in our country and our region, there are a lot of forces pulling us apart, but it's very comforting to know that there are leaders here in Stonington that are actively trying to pull us together, bring us together, and make Stonington a welcoming place for all people. This affordable housing project is going to provide that critical first step for people to join this community, to become residents, to invest in and support the small businesses of Pawcatuck, hopefully to serve on local commissions and boards like this one, and enjoy what this community has to offer. And I know, in my experience, Stonington is a welcoming town. I urge you to support that message tonight, and I urge you to approve this important project this evening so we can move to the next step. Thank you again. Our entire team remains available for any questions, and we certainly reserve any right of rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission members, you want to take a 5-minute break? You want to keep going? Anyone need a break? Guess not. At the present time, we'll hear anyone like to speak in favor of this application?
So for people out there, there is a way to raise your hand to show that you want to speak here, which is if you put your cursor, assuming you're on a computer, you put your cursor down to the little icon that looks like a person. Click on that and you'll see a bunch of names. If you put your cursor over your name, a little hand will come up and you can click on that, and that lets us know that you want to speak here. And I believe if you're just on a telephone, you can just dial *3 and that will raise the hand. So, Mr. Chairman, can you see these hands or can only I see them?
I can't see. Where are the hands?
If you click on the thing, the participants button that looks like a little person, and then you'll see the people's names.
Okay.
On the call.
I see him. I got him.
So, of course, I don't know if they're in favor or in opposition or whatever, but I can just see hands.
All right.
So do you just want me to
call people? Call them for me, please.
All right, just going from top to bottom. First, we have Kevin. And if you, when it's your turn to speak, if you can unmute yourself, of course.
Kevin. Keith.
Yeah.
Only if they're in favor. Raise their hands now.
Oh, well.
Okay, go ahead. Kevin?
Hi, this is Kevin, and I am speaking in favour of this project. I think it is a win-win. I won't go through all the reasons why. I think the presentation tonight has been...
Could you please identify his last name for the record,
yes,
please?
Yes, my name is Kevin Bowdler, spelled B-O-W-D-L-E-R. And I think this project is a win-win for Stonington. It's a win, play on words, a win for the residents of Stonington. It's a win for all of the taxpayers of Stonington, and it's a win for the potential new residents of Stonington, and obviously, hopefully, a win for win. One of my key concerns about Stonington and all of the Northeast is a declining population. And I think that Stonington has relatively expensive housing stock. And this is a fairly rare opportunity where we get a mix of fairly small to 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments, which significantly diversifies the housing stock, which makes us more attractive to other surrounding towns. And hopefully, if we can stop our population from declining as fast as other towns, then I think Stonington will be in a better economic shape in 20 and 30 years' time. I think this is a tremendous opportunity. I'm really excited to see it. It's potentially a transformational project in downtown Pawcatuck.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Judd and Dale Rosen.
Thank you, Keith. We have two things of concern, but at this point, the chair has asked for support, and Mrs. Rosen and I have some more to say regarding other concerns, but we certainly support the concept of the new pedestrian crosswalk design. It'd be very helpful to the area. And I reserve the opportunity to come back and talk later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and we've got Dave Hammond.
Keith, excuse me, but are people supposed to be giving their address as they speak?
Thank
you.
Yes, that's true. If people can do that, please.
Judd Rosen and Dale Rosen were speaking at 6 Cogswell Street.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dave Hammond, Greenhaven Road in Pawcatuck. I've been a 20-year resident of Pawcatuck, and I've been driving through downtown for those 20 years. And it's been, a good portion of that time that I've thought how nice it would be to have infill development on that vacant property that would knit this community and neighborhood together. So I can't tell you how excited the EDC is to bring this, bring this project or support this project, and as a real asset for the town. The EDC has 11 initiatives that we focus on, 5 of which are targeted for downtown Pawcatuck. We feel that revitalizing the downtown section is one of the key areas that would benefit Stonington, and where we can make a big impact as a commission for the town, and a big contribution. Many of the benefits have already been discussed. The EDC sees this as a project that will deliver a much needed boost to a downtown that needs new investment, particularly inclusive housing. And I would note that we hosted a couple of community conversations where we gained support from not only one conversation was with the business community, and another was with open to the public, where folks had a chance for input, and we listened and attempted to accommodate as much of that input as possible, and also heard a lot of support. This project will enhance downtown Pawcatuck as a walkable neighborhood, in support of the business, the retail and commercial sectors, and add, just by putting feet on the street will add vibrancy to downtown Pawcatuck. So won't it be great to see people walking and enjoying the downtown experience? A couple of previous folks mentioned alignment with a plan of conservation and development. It's very important that, we've taken, the EDC's vision for downtown Pawcatuck, we take into account guidance provided by all the residents as captured in the plan of conservation and development. So in particular, 8.1, strengthen and enhance village centers, and this is right in the center of downtown Pawcatuck. 9.1, which is diversify our housing portfolio, which Kevin Bowdler spoke to earlier. And there's almost 40% of Stonington residents are cost burdened for their housing, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Projects like this help to provide better housing equity within our town, and opportunities for people who work in our town to live in town. And finally, 9.2, the POCD, which is strengthen residential development patterns. And so this project provides, a good balance of residential and commercial, as I spoke to earlier. So on behalf of the EDC, as chair of the EDC, I urge the Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as the entire Stonington community, to join me in embracing this important development, and thank you very much.
Next on my screen here is the person shown as call-in user number 5. And hopefully they know that they're called call-in user number 5. So if you can unmute your microphone if you are looking to speak. You're the person who raised your hand. Someone just on a telephone. Maybe we'll try that again, but.
We have number 9, Keith.
What's that?
Number 9 showed up, not 5.
On my screen, it's call-in number 5. But maybe we can jump to the next named person who was.
Hi, my name is Jim Lathrop. I'm an EDC member. I'm also an abutting property owner on 29 West Broad Street. That's the building on the other side of the alleyway across from the Bess Eaton location. So I've had a chance over the last few months to really look at this project, both privately and as an EDC member. And this is a really, really important project for downtown. You know, many of us that have been trying to invest in downtown. You can do small projects. We can do small work down there, but this is an opportunity for a very, very big thing to happen at downtown Pawcatuck. I think the applicant has been thorough and thoughtful with her application. I believe this is the right thing for downtown Pawcatuck and the town, and I would wholeheartedly support this effort.
Okay, so except for call-in user number 5, I don't have any more raised hands. So if there's anyone else out there who wants to speak in favor, if you can please just speak now.
Is anyone opposed to this application? Do we have anyone?
I don't see any new hands being raised.
Any general?
I still do see call-in user number 5 whose hand is raised. I'm going to unmute them. So call-in user number 5 on a telephone, you are unmuted now.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you? My name is Janice Mink. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I've been listening to this presentation with great interest, and I agree that it is, in an ideal world, a wonderful idea to have an apartment building down there, probably not one this large. But my objection, and I need to go on the record with this, is that you are building a new building in the floodplain. The building that took damage there and that had to be torn down was victim of a flood. There is going to be another flood and many more floods and many more serious floods. Today, the New York Times online had a special section about damages to the coastlines of all of our towns. And I think that Stonington as a town needs to take this threat very seriously and not build new things, especially things this large that are going to have to be taken care of FEMA and probably removed from the water at some point in a very few amount of years, a decade or two. I understand that we have a beautiful westerly Pawcatuck downtown. We should keep it going. I love what Jim Lathrop has done there. but putting new buildings, instead of renovating existing buildings, putting new buildings into the water just seems like it's a very foolish idea. And that is why I oppose this project. I think the site is not blighted. I think it is kind of open and clear. There's great river access. I think it would be a wonderful park, picnic tables, a seasonal restaurant, anything like that I could see. But 92 residential apartments, or 82, I forgot. Anyway, quite a few. This does not make sense to me at all. I find it an environmental hazard, very dangerous for people, completely against the safety of where you should put a building. In Stonington, we should not build our buildings into the water. We should build our buildings on high ground. We need to build the buildings away from the water. The water is not safe. This is actually an occasion where you can honestly and with a clear heart say, because of safety reasons, we will not build this building.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in opposition? Any general comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Dale and Judd Rosen at 6 Cogswell Street again. I'd like to make our statement. We are in favor of the project. We have some general comments and concerns. We live at 6 Cogswell Street, and we're the closest owners of residents and Stonington constituents as well of the property and abutting owners. You should have 2 separate written communications on record about this project from us. One dated the 27th of July to the Economic Development Commission, and the second on the 1st of September to the town's Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Commission. The developer and other town officials have copies as well. In addition of our correspondence, we've met in person with the chair of the Economic Development Commission, with Candace Palmer, the fire chief, several of the developer's representatives, the former director of zoning, the Riverwalk Condominium Association officers and directors, a few of the condo owners here at Riverwalk Condos, and a number of the business owners. We have a good grasp of the project and its impact on our local area and businesses. And while we don't disagree with the project, we continue to engage in the process, in the future process, and we'll be observing it and making comments going forward. And in general, we support this project. We support the relocation, as we said earlier, of the crosswalk. But tonight we have concerns a bit about the safety regarding to the additional burden of automobile and truck traffic that we will have on Cogswell Street, and particularly at the intersection of Broad Street. We're not referring to the traffic necessarily that's leaving Broad Street and coming into Cogswell Street. We're referring to the traffic that would be leaving from the residents of this project that's for review and those of us that live on the street now, Cogswell Street and then the intersection of Broad Street. Now, our condo area has 24 residential units and only about 25 cars in all of our parking lots. Now, this new development will have 4 times the amount of vehicles measured by the parking spaces. And we question, again, how well Cogswell Street, and particularly that intersection, will accommodate safely 4 times the current existing traffic. The traffic consultant hired by the developer has made comments about that, but the real issues are exactly as another person pointed out, that at peak times, particularly in the warmer weather when there's many tourists in the area, it's nearly very difficult to take your life in your hands trying to get out of Cogswell Street during those periods of time. So what we would like to see, if possible, is an opportunity for another one of the WIN representatives or the traffic consultant to sit down with us one day and discuss our observation over 30 years of that traffic at that intersection exiting Cogswell Street. Again, we support in principle the project and its fine design. So thank you very much. Our email address is available. We can make some time to visit informally after your voting. Thank you, Keith.
Anyone else like general comments?
Yeah, I would. Stephen Capizano, we have a business at 5 Cogswell Street. And I actually want to second what Judd just said. I'm being in favor of the project with reservations with Cogswell Street. And I think what I see is an opportunity to make just to work with it and make it better. When Joe was talking about the traffic, he was talking about how many cars per hour. What I think he failed to mention was how long it takes for each car to get across. So sometimes if you have 30 in the peak hour, which I suspect might be even more than that, but let's say 30, that's one car every 2 minutes. But what happens is that it takes longer than 2 minutes to get across Broad Street to take a left. So you don't have one car there, you might have 2 or 3. Right now, I'm saying, as Judd was saying, there's a problem taking that left. So it's not that I'm not in favor of it. I just see if we don't look at this in a better way, a bigger problem happening there. And then also, I want to say this, that you were talking about 15 accidents in 3 years. I think that's a lot of accidents. 33 accidents on Liberty Street seems to me to be a lot of accidents. So there is a problem. And what this can do is it can give us an opportunity to really work with this problem. But that's what I want, the committee to really look at in regards to that. The other thing I'd like to say is, in some way, I don't want this, but in some way, are you willing to give up some parking spaces for safety? And by that, I mean, if you're coming out of Best Eaton and trying to take a left out of Best Eaton, it's tough when there's a car parked right there. If you're coming in, and Joe, great presentation, but what I would like to have seen is you took a picture of a left out of Cogswell Street and with no cars there. And I think it's incumbent to understand that that's not the way it looks most of the time. So I'm just going to finish by saying, here's an opportunity. And I think this is the time to jump on that opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak at this time?
I forgot to give my address, Janice Mink, 18 William Street, Pawcatuck.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Colleen? Yes, none. We'll go back to the hearing none. We'll go back to the applicant for the rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I want to thank the people who spoke in favor of the project and appreciate them coming out tonight and staying as long as they did. Just a couple points of rebuttal, and I'll try to be quick. In terms of Ms. Minx's comments, Your regulations allow the construction of residential buildings within floodplain areas, subject to very strict regulations and provisions, including the elevation of the residential levels of any building up above the floodplain. We are completely 100% compliant with your regulations on that point. There is nothing that allows you to deny an application for residential housing in a floodplain if it is constructed to FEMA floodplain construction standards. And that's exactly what we're doing. I would respectfully disagree with some of the statements of Ms. Minks. This building is not in the water. It is set back almost 70 feet from the Pawcatuck River. And I would suggest that it is not dangerous at all. And at this point, just to clarify that issue, I'd like Paul Vitaliano, our civil engineer, to comment on his professional opinion as a licensed engineer in the state of Connecticut as to the safety of the design of the building in regards to floodplain. And I'd also like him to comment on the reports of both the town's consulting engineers on that issue. So, Mr. Vitaliano.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. A couple of points specifically regarding the site itself. When we first looked at this project, we did reach out to the consulting engineer, and we were actually told that for certain reasons that potentially compensatory flood storage was not required in this site, and we wanted to be conservative, and we wanted to kind of provide that compensatory storage anyway. So I would like to point out that we did grade our site in a manner that did provide that compensatory storage, meaning that we did not take away any flood capacity that currently exists today. Additionally, as we discussed earlier, we did raise the building elevation 1 foot above that flood elevation. So and that's really just our lobby. Our lobby is at elevation 11. Our parking is at 15, and our residents are obviously a full story above that. So from a safety standpoint, while the 100-year flood would overtop the banks of the river and flood several areas of downtown, including our parking lot, our building would be safe. There is also an emergency egress door from our parking area. So in the parking level at elevation 15, there is a door that leads out to that emergency stairwell, which then obviously you could walk up the stairs to the higher elevation in the rear of the building, which is, at the 27 range or actually even higher. So we feel from that standpoint, this is actually probably one of the safer spots to be in town if there was a flood. There is also obviously the amenity space, which we said was at a higher tier. To clarify some of a question that I was asked earlier during the presentation regarding flood elevations and how that impacts the road, I had assumed, or I had mentioned that I believe the elevation at the intersection of Cogswell and West Broad was around 7. There's actually, I checked while we were talking, I did check, and the grade changes off kind of quickly there. Elevation 7 is actually at the end of the alleyway. By the time you get that short distance to the intersection of Cogswell and West Broad, you're already above 10. You're around 10 and a half. So if you're approaching the site from the Rhode Island side, you're actually at a level above the flood. And then as you go down Cogswell, you start to go down from 10 down to 8, and then at the end of Cogswell, you're about 7 and a half. So and then the alleyway also, even though that intersection's at about 7, that actually rises as you drive up the alleyway, and you quickly get to elevation 9. So I know it was mentioned before that, is someone driving through 3 feet of water. They're not driving through 3 feet of water. There are short bursts where you're driving through potentially 2 feet of water. But overall, we do feel that we're situated in a unique spot in this floodplain where the building itself is safe and elevated above these critical elevations.
Thank you, Paul. Turn to the comments of Mr. and Mrs. Rosen and Mr. Capizano. I just want to start first. Both Mr. and Mrs. Rosen and Mr. Capizano are neighbors of this project, and WIN has been made very clear from the start that they have an open policy of trying to work cooperatively with their neighbors. Mr. Rosen asked for the opportunity to see here. Asked for the opportunity to have a conversation down the road. We've had multiple conversations with Mr. Rosen, and we intend to continue to have conversations. And we definitely want to work with him. We know he's a leader in that neighborhood, and we certainly appreciate his support of the project. I would remind the commission that issues of traffic are matters of expert testimony here in the state of Connecticut. When you have a licensed professional traffic engineer provide testimony, our courts have made clear that you must give that proper weight in your deliberations. And so when Mr. Balkis tells you that this is a safe or safer situation than the existing condition, that has to be go into your consideration of his testimony. I would also note, and I'll let Mr. Balkis talk a little bit as well about this. In his traffic study, he talks about level of service, and level of service goes directly to the delays that drivers experience at intersections. So there was some question about delays at the intersection of Cogswell and West Broad. There is no change in level of service as a result of this project. For lack of a better way of saying it, and I've used this analogy, I can't even tell you how many times in the last 20 years of doing this, the traffic that's generated off of this site is a drop in the bucket compared to the traffic that travels along West Broad Street on a daily basis. And that is even under COVID situations where we have a depressed traffic count. Just turn it over to Joe just to quickly address and confirm the issue of the level of service, confirm the issues of accident counts in the area. And again, Joe, if you can just clarify again that in your expert opinion as a licensed traffic engineer in the state of Connecticut, you do not see any public health or safety threat as a result of this project, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Joe?
Sorry about that. I had a double mute. Sorry about that. Again, for the record, Joe Balskis. So these are all valid concerns by the residents. And as I said before, I don't live there, so it's good to hear these comments from them and understand them. And I'm certainly willing to meet with them after approval if need be. And there's no step to the process. There's a DOT encroachment permit process, so you'll have a voice in that. So yeah, willing to listen and understand that. So you brought up two issues. One was the crashes. So the crashes, Stephen mentioned that there's 15 crashes, a lot of crashes. Yeah, you could say 15 crashes, a lot of crashes. However, if the crashes had involved angle-type vehicles, if the crashes were involving cars turning, then we would have a cause for concern as a traffic engineer. But the crashes reported there are rear end. So it's basically during congested times, during times when traffic is stop and go and slow moving, that you're having this minor fender bender rear end only crashes. So yes, the 50 crashes, is it terrible? No, it's not terrible. It's not a major issue. If there was angle type crashes, then we'd look at that again and say, wait a minute, maybe this improvement isn't going to address that. But these improvements will address the concerns we've seen out there. And it's not the crashes. The crashes are not a concern at this intersection. I mentioned it's a concern at the other intersection which DOT is looking at. So that was one thing. So the other thing was a delay. So yes, it's acknowledged that there are delays leaving Cogswell, and we all know that at peak times it can be tough to get out of there. I was out there a few times, and yes, it can take you 10 seconds, it can take you 30 seconds to get out there. So what we measured as traffic engineers is for our impact is what are we doing to that delay? Are we adding to it? Yes, we're adding to it. Yes, it's going to be a little longer to get out. But is that delay significant? Is it resulting in a change of level of service? And from our analysis, we're not seeing that. We're seeing at most 10 seconds of increased delay over the course of an hour for the vehicles leaving. Could it be more? It could be more. It could be less. It could be less. But the point being is that in our analysis, we didn't see a significant change, significant increase in the delays that would result in a change in level of service, but then tell us, wait a minute, there's an issue here with capacity. There's not enough gaps in traffic flow. So yes, we acknowledge that it can be challenging at times to turn left out of Cogswell. And we are adding some traffic to that. The traffic that we're adding is very minor in nature. It's not a significant amount of traffic that, like Bill's saying, it's a small amount of traffic. And if we were doing a retail development, then we're talking about a lot more traffic. We're talking about a whole different set of improvements here. So yes, the delays are increasing, a very minor increase in delay. but not enough to change a level of service designation that we have in our report. So I hope that helps understand what where we're coming from in terms of concerns. And again, the improvements that we're providing will provide, I think in terms of my opinion, safer egress from Cogswell, safer entry into Cogswell, as well as for pedestrians across the intersection. And these improvements are all going to be reviewed by DOT. DOT has them right now. They're looking at them in terms of this intersection. And if as needed, the town's local traffic authority has a voice in that process, and the residents as well can be part of that process as well.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Joe. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation tonight. We're obviously available if any of the commissioners have additional questions. I just do want to remind the commission, to the extent possible, we would ask that you move the question tonight on this application. As I said before, we have an application ready to go to the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, which is a competitive application for this project. We certainly would appreciate anything that you could do to keep this process moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we close the public hearing, do any of the alternates have any questions at this time?
This is Ryan. No, I don't have any questions.
Keith?
Yeah, as part of this, the zoning regulations make us prepare what they call a conceptual evaluation of the project's basic feasibility and an assessment of the potential impacts because of the size and the number of residential units. So that's what we did for this project here. You know, this, as was mentioned, there are several areas that the project doesn't meet the normal zoning requirements, but of course, as an 830G application, it's exempt from doing so. And some of those are the maximum density. There's normally 16 units allowed for a just solely residential use with 82 proposed. However, the density isn't really that far under the density that would be allowed if this were a mixed-use development. Now, in trying to market the development potential of the site, the town's EDC did look at whether there was demand for mixed use or commercial use there. They didn't find any. But if it was, the density wouldn't be too far off. It's about 2 or 3 feet above the maximum height. Although again, if this were a mixed use development, the height could be up to 70 feet. So taller buildings were thought of in this zone when the PV5 was developed a few years ago. The application does conform to a lot of the other bulk requirements in the zone, including all the setback requirements, the floor area ratio, and the minimum on-site parking, because only one parking space is required per unit in here. As Mr. Sweeney said, the courts have really upheld developers of affordable housing when these have been appealed to court. If you look in Judge Fuller's land use treatise, which sort of is a summary of land use issues in the state, it's just full of pages and pages of examples of towns that denied affordable housing applications only to be reversed in court. So there's a long history of that in the state. So one of the main aspects of the report that we did was to look at the feasibility of the project. So it wasn't just taking our word for it. It was, we send the project and the development plans out to various departments and experts in the town. And we really didn't get back any substantial impacts or problems with it, especially ones that directly relate to health and safety. Two of the most important were the utility providers, the Westerly Water Company and the WPCA, who stated that there was adequate capacity, and in the case of the water company, the adequate fire flows to fight a fire there. And in past cases where these have been denied for health and safety, the utilities tend to be the main reasons to do so. For the egregious examples out there that were referenced earlier, a lot of them are, large buildings like this that don't have public sewer or water to actually serve them. Drainage impact, as was mentioned, this was reviewed by the town's consulting engineer and also the town's new town engineer. And all their comments were addressed prior to the wetlands meeting. The Pawcatuck Fire District had comments. There's ongoing discussions with the fire marshal, and those issues are mostly addressed at this point. We talked a lot about traffic. I think a lot was said about that already by the traffic engineer. Again, I keep saying health and safety because that is the main issue, and it really has to rise to that level of creating a dangerous situation. I should point out also that downtown Pawcatuck is the commission created the downtown Pawcatuck Parking Overlay District about 13 years ago, which created flexibility, especially for existing commercial buildings. But, the point being that an excess of on-site parking is something that wasn't seen as a good thing for downtown Pawcatuck, especially because of the on-site parking in the area and the public parking nearby. The site's not located in the groundwater protection area or a coastal area management overlay district, so no CAM application is needed for this. It is located in the flood hazard area. This was reviewed by our floodplain management consultant from the firm Malone and McBroom, and their comments were addressed. As was stated earlier, the town does allow both residential and commercial construction in flood hazard areas as long as the flood hazard standards are met, which they are in this case. This was also referred to DEP's wildlife office, I believe it is, that reviews applications that fall in areas of concern for the Natural Diversity Database map. Their comments were that they didn't have any concerns about this project's impact on sensitive species. One of the things about this plan is that it does live up to a previous plan from 15 years ago called the Pawcatuck Revitalization Strategies Plan that was created by the Pawcatuck Revitalization Organization. This plan included a design charrette that was done in the neighborhood and came up with a conceptual redevelopment of this area that had a higher density residential development and a pedestrian bridge over the river. That project assumed the grain elevator would still be there, but with the grain elevator gone, it does make sense to move the residential development to where it is now, which moves it a bit directly away from the river, opens up the public access. As was stated, this was reviewed by the Architectural Design Review Board just last night. They didn't have a formal motion, but they wanted me to relay their summary of the application, which I'll do here, because this was not listed in the report that was sent out. They had 6 comments. Number 1 was that they recommend using brick material to get closer to referencing the historic mill construction. Number 2 was to recommend introduction of simple window trim and/or cornices. Number 3, the board felt that the design needed more work to avoid an institutional character. Number 4, requesting building cross sections. Number 5, recommend further study of the entry facade to provide pedestrian scale and aesthetic introduction of brick at that level. Number 6, recommend studying roofline variations, especially where mechanicals are located, and adding articulation along the entry facade. And the board asked that they come back for their next meeting on October 19th. So what, I haven't gotten to recommended stipulations yet, but one of them would be just a stipulation to basically the applicant to have a follow-up meeting with ADRB to try to address these issues here. So let me jump to the recommended stipulations here if the commission approves this tonight. Number one is that the final plan shall be recorded in the town's land evidence records. Number two, the final plan shall be reviewed to the satisfaction of the town engineer and the Pawcatuck Fire District. And I should note the town engineer really doesn't have any outstanding comments at this time. Number three, standard language for erosion and sedimentation control bond. Number four, the public access easement shall be recorded prior to the issuance of any certificate of zoning compliance, and that's a slight change from what was written, and shall include specific language permitting construction of a future pedestrian bridge. Easement will require Board of Selectmen approval. Number five, transportation-related off-site improvements that are approved by Connecticut DOT shall be completed prior to issuance of a certificate of zoning compliance. Number six, the applicant shall provide a flood evacuation plan to the Department of Planning prior to the issuance of a zoning permit, which shall be recorded in the town's land evidence records. Number seven, DEP general stormwater permit shall be obtained prior to the issuance of any zoning permits. And I would add the number 8 that I mentioned before, which modifications to the building design addressing the Architectural Design Review Board's September 14th recommendations shall be reviewed by the board. So the commission's actions required here is a decision on the special use permit waivers requested and a decision on the special use permit itself.
Okay.
We have a draft resolution language on page 38 of the report here.
I gotta close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, before you close the public hearing, could I speak just for a second?
Yeah.
Just on 2 items. As we said before, we've got no problem going back to the Architectural Design Review Board for further discussions. Just, I think it should be made clear in whatever the condition that can't be we can't be forced to make any changes architecturally because there's no jurisdiction to do so. But out of spirit of a goodwill, we have no problem going back to them next month and talking about some of their suggestions. In fact, some of their suggestions on the entranceway are things that we thought were good ideas and we want to explore with them. The only other comment I have is this project, due to its size, is likely exempt from the DEP general stormwater permit. The site is less than 5 acres in size. So if we're exempt from that permit, we shouldn't have to get that permit. So I just want to clarify that record as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do I hear any all this want to speak? None? Do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
This is Ben. I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone? Aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Do I hear a motion on this application?
Mr. Chair, this is Lynn. I'd like to ask a couple of questions of Keith, if I could, before we have a motion.
Yeah, go right ahead. So
Keith, I think that what we heard was that Stonington sits at about 4.9% of affordable housing. Is that in 2019? With the recent expansion of affordable housing in a couple of projects that have been progressing in 2020, as well as if this were to go through, what would our percentage be at that point?
It's true that there are some under construction now that aren't counted yet because the state doesn't count them until they're actually occupied. So I don't know what that number is, but we're at 5.9% as of last year, not counting the 2 that are under construction now. So I'm not sure what those figures would be. I don't think it would get us over the 10%. And what counts is, that we basically don't meet it now. So, assuming this gets developed and those other ones, it'd be interesting to see how high we get towards 10%.
So one of the reasons I'm asking this question is that I didn't know whether the data that was quoted included the projects that were ongoing. So you've answered that. They're not included until they're occupied, or they receive a certificate of occupancy. Which is it? The building.
Yeah, it's one of those. I'm not sure if it's occupied or just gets a certificate of occupancy.
Okay. So the reason I was asking is if there was an increase in the percentage of this proposed building for the low income, would that get us to our percent?
Yeah, that I'm not sure if it would. My guess is that it still wouldn't be 10%, but the state adds up all those figures for every town in the state and basically figures that.
Mr. Sweeney, do you happen to know that?
Well, the hearing is closed.
Oh, okay.
We're sort of locked out of the
All right,
conversation.
that probably would have been nice information, Keith, to have during the course of this discussion. Also, I didn't see it, and I might have missed it in the table, so forgive me if I did. But does it specify? I know it specifies the percentage of the units that would be for low-income housing, but does it specify which units or the percentage of which type of units? So I'm thinking, the units with the terrace, are they subject to that, or do they have 5 of the 2 bedrooms and 10 of the 1 bedrooms? How does that work?
Well, I don't know every detail of their affordable housing plan, but by law, they can't relegate the affordable units to some undesirable part of the building. They have to be mixed in, and they have to be just like all the other units. They can't be of inferior quality or anything like that. So,
okay,
it is all supposed to be mixed like that.
Okay, and then my final question had to do with asking for a waiver on the shadow study. So, do you have any comments on that, Keith? I don't think you mentioned that.
No, I believe, with the shadows going north from the building, I think it would largely fall on the river and the train tracks. It doesn't seem like it would be an impact on any other buildings. I think even the buildings on the westerly side are far enough away where it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, and so there's no safety concerns there?
No, I wouldn't think so.
Okay. And so I do agree with the statements that were made or the comments made from the Architectural Review Committee, which for those who are in the planning and zoning, that rarely happens that I agree with their comments. So I think that, I think this building, to be quite frank, looks like, you tried to save a lot of money. Let's put it that way. And I would hope, because it is going to be a rather large building, and as you said, it's going to bring a lot of people into the area and living in the area, that we want to provide something that is aesthetically pleasing to the town. And I do think that those comments should be taken into account, especially if we waive some of the studies that we've been asked to waive. So it's just a comment that I think, I understand you're going to go back and have discussions with them, but I think it'd be good to take some of their comments and actually act upon them. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks.
Do I hear a motion on this application now?
Mr. Chair, this is Ben. We have two motions to go through, right? Keith, the waivers and then the SUP itself.
That's right.
So I make a motion to approve the waivers.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? You want to make another motion, Ben?
Yes, I make motion for the special use permit itself with the 8 stipulations. The 7th with the DEEP needs to be reviewed as per Bill Sweeney and his comment on the 5 acres. And then number 8 stipulation, the design review board works in conjunction with wind development to come to a resolution.
Do I hear a second on the motion?
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Fred?
Aye.
Okay. Sorry.
Well, I have to be honest. Since the matter is entirely in the hands of the state of Connecticut, I'm not sure why we spent 2 hours or 3 hours doing this. It really irritates me, but it is what it is, and so I vote aye.
Okay. Thank you. Application's approved.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, all of
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great rest of your night.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
A request for a break? Mr.
Yeah, you have a break. Well, we'll just make for information purposes only. What is the name of that one? Spruce Ridge, Keith?
Yeah,
That stopped. There is no construction. There's
that's right.
nothing
It has
going on.
stopped.
What's going on?
It stopped due to just
What?
financial problems that they're having that hopefully can be resolved soon.
So Lord knows when that will be done. Take a 5-minute break.
5 minutes? Okay, thank you. Oh, David disappeared. Hello, David.
Huh.
Did you lose him?
We may have. Well, he's still showing up as part of the meeting.
No. I don't have my phone to text him.
Should I try to call him on the cell phone? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. It's
getting late.
He's lost.
Hey, Fred, was that your puppy that was in the newspaper last week?
No,
Okay.
it wasn't, but that was a case of mistaken identity. My puppy was on shore. That was another puppy.
Okay. I saw it, and I was going to ask you if that was your boy got famous.
Yeah. Well, he got famous, but that wasn't his picture.
Okay.
Okay, so I reached him, and he's going to try to reconnect.
Okay.
He's going to completely back out of the meeting and try to reconnect. So we'll see if he comes back.
Okay.
Maybe this is an opportunity to have a revolution. We could depose him or something.
You gonna nominate yourself, Fred?
No. That's the problem.
Watch what you wish for.
Mutiny.
Alexander Haig. I'm in charge.
If what we have to follow is mostly administrative, oh, there he is.
Coming in.
I see him on the screen again. No picture yet.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Am I back on?
Yeah, there you are.
You're back.
Okay to proceed, Mr. Chair?
You hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
He's showing up as being muted.
Yeah.
David, you're muted.
I'll call him again.
Killing me.
Okay, so he has asked that we move forward without him. He's going to try to get back in, but that we someone else chair the meeting. We have a vice chair, right? Someone else chair the meeting, and
That would be I.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, sorry about that. So that's what he would want us to do. He'll try to get back in, but I guess we'll see what happens there.
So where were we when we were so rudely interrupted?
Well, we'd also have to seat someone in Dave's absence, which I believe would be Mr. Deasy, who was seated for a few minutes at the beginning.
So reopening PZ 2015RA, Town of Stonington, PZC. Retaining walls.
All right, so we discussed this at the last meeting. We decided to continue it to, just come back with some modifications. The consensus of the board was that we were going to stick with 5 as the height of a retaining wall and a building setback that would require a special use permit. So that's what this new version in the report lists here is 5 feet as the cutoff. The only other change is that the new modified regulation removes retaining walls. It exempts retaining walls from being considered structures in the definition. The reason being is that it really didn't really make sense that they were structures but allowed in the building setback under certain circumstances. It was more clear cut if we just exempt retaining walls from being structures in the definition. But then we have all these rules and regulations elsewhere that says if your retaining wall is in the building setback and is more than 5 feet tall, it needs a special use permit. So that's really the only change, is that definition of structure and changing all the height references from 7 feet to 5 feet.
So Keith, that means any wall 4 feet 11 inches and under does not require a permit. Is that correct?
It would require a zoning permit from our office, and
okay,
a wall of over 3 feet also needs a building permit, but it wouldn't need a special use permit. It goes to the commission.
Makes sense to me.
So Keith, in the first sentence, under fences, in the first paragraph, it says that it only has to be within 1/2 foot from the property line. So we're saying that you can have a wall that's 4'11" high, that's 6 inches from your property line. I think that's under where it says fences and yard, it's 0.1.
Oh, yeah.
And it says fences, walls, hedges, trees. And then it goes on to say at least 1/2 foot. From the
Yeah,
property
that is existing language that's been in there for decades.
Yeah,
The purpose
so but
of it-
now that we're changing the height from 3 feet to 4 feet 11 inches, I'm not sure that's appropriate.
Well, there might be cases where retaining walls do need to be right on the property line. And of course, if they're kicked up to the commission level, that's something you would look at if having it too close to the property line causes a visibility problem or some sort of impact on a neighbor. This section here covers even fences. So, to be more strict with fences would be tough.
Could I offer one additional comment? Could I offer a comment here?
Oh, sure, yeah, and it's
okay. In most cases, a 4'11" wall would have a footing that would force it to be further away from the property line than that. So as a wall grows in height, the footing grows in size. So the footing can't encroach over the property line, and the wall would be offset from the property line by the by the width of the footing.
Oh, so if it was, so what you're saying, Chuck, is if it was 4 feet, it would have to be at least 4 feet from the property line? Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily 4 feet, Lynn, but there would be a substantial offset in most cases. At 4 feet 11, you need a substantial foundation for overturning moment, and it could be 4 feet easily,
Okay.
depending on the design. It would be
Okay.
very, very expensive to build something 4 feet 11 high and 6 inches from the property line.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I lost my microphone. All right, so do we have to do a motion on this? Is that it?
Well, because new information was submitted here with the new language, we probably should see if there's anyone from the public who has any comments on the modification. So if you want to open that up to the public.
Gardner, you're muted.
There we go. Oh, is there anyone present who has wants to make any comments on the information? Okay, hearing none, move on. So now do we do a motion on this?
Yeah, we'd have a motion to close the public hearing. See if any of the alternates who aren't seated, which is really just Mr. Sheehan, have any final comments before the hearing's closed.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any comments on this before we close the public hearing?
Just one comment, Mr. Chairman. I think this is the type of regulation that you know, the staff can easily handle and handle well, and it doesn't clutter our agenda with things that don't require a special permit. And it's just, I think we present better to the public, and it allows us to focus on things that we really ought to focus on. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. But Keith, for the record, well, Dave, you want to pick it up?
You hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I don't know where we at.
Well, we've had Mr. Deasy seated in your place. You know, had some discussion.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We're about to close the hearing. So if you had any comments, now would be the time.
No.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion to close, that's seconded to close the public hearing. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, public hearing is closed. Now, Keith, do we need a motion on this, or should we go with what Chuck says and ride with it as it is?
Well, you would have to have a motion to approve the regulation amendment as revised to September 10th.
Okay, could we?
If it's approved, it would have an effective date of October 5th.
All right, could we have such a motion?
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
This is Ben, I second it.
Okay, we have a motion that's been made and seconded to adopt the changes to the resolution effective.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. That's it. Dave, you can pick it up now.
Well done, Gardner. The motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Keith, for following through on the retaining walls. And your
Thank you
staff
very much.
report, as usual, was very helpful. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
so we've done all our business then?
Yeah. This is
Okay,
it for tonight.
we have a motion to adjourn has been seconded.
Well, can I just ask a quick question? Keith,
So-
when are you going to have the language on the ancillary dwelling unit?
That has already been submitted as a new regulation amendment for tonight's meeting. So the hearing will be, either middle of October or later.
Okay.
It's on
Schedule.
the docket. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
It's
already
on
been
the docket.
submitted as a new application with all the gross floor area language in there also.
And the timing, and you changed the timing of it with the garages?
It's in there, but it has to be a certain amount of years old.
Okay.
Can we have it as soon as possible, Keith?
Yeah, we'll schedule that as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you all.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so I guess we're adjourned.
We're-
Happy fall.
Happy.
Bye, everybody.
See you at the next session. Good night.
Hey, Lynn.
Night.
Lynn.
Good night.
Night. Lynn. I lost Lynn. Lynn.
Yes.
Hey, Lynn. They're having 2 foot of rain in Pensacola.
Yeah, it's bad.
I know.